Hi everyone, I am Merve Tapınç.
And I'm Amber Sheldon.
Today we are going to discuss whether machines can think and how humans are different from machines. In what ways we are thinking differently than machines. We are going to talk about Turing machine and Chinese room and
Qualia.
qualia.
Yeah.
Whatever that means.
Whatever it means. The mysterious qualia.
Yes.
So I guess I'll start us off with Turing's thought experiment, the imitation game, which is really relatable right now since we have such wonderful technology that's able to chit-chat with us, and like people even fall in love with robots and things like that, thinking that it's a real relationship. So let's just lay out the thought experiment. So let's say there are three players, A, B, and C. C is the interrogator who asks questions to A and B, and C cannot see A and B, but has to guess which one is the human and which one is the computer machine. And one of the characters, A or B, is going to be really deceptive and like try to be like, oh yeah, I like going to the park and walking my dog. I'm totally not a machine. Like, let's say the machine is the deceptive one. And then the other one will be like, no, please, I'm the person. But like the interrogator still doesn't know who's telling the truth or not. So whether or not the machine can win is the question here. And if it can succeed, so to speak, at the imitation game and deceive the interrogator about whether or not it's a machine or a person, is the machine thinking? Can the computer be considered to be thinking if it is indistinguishable from a person in these sorts of interactions? What do you think?
Yeah, so it seems the first thing that comes to mind is that I think, well, even if they are thinking, they are very different from how humans are thinking. And the immediate thing that comes to mind that distinguishes human way of thinking from a machine thinking is that, well, we have consciousness. But what is consciousness? And philosophers have been trying to give an account of consciousness for a long time. One way to cash out what consciousness is, well, is to say that like there is something that it is like to be thinking for a human being. Like in all of our experience, actions, behavior, there is this phenomenal aspect that accompanies our experience. There is something it is like to be talking, thinking, walking, perceiving, and machines do not seem that they are capable of that. I have two questions about this kind of definition though. The first thing is that what does it have to do with thinking that we have this phenomenal character? It doesn't seem that it is necessary for thinking to have this experiential aspect of experience. And so yeah, like why do we necessarily need to think that machines we couldn't say that machines do not think just because they do not have phenomenal consciousness. And the second thing is that, well, Thomas Nagel talked about this. Like there is something it is like to be a human being, but we do not know whether, like, what it is like to be a bat, for example. And so we should be skeptical about that. Yeah, so even Nagel leaves us at a skeptical point that we do not know what it is like to be a bat. So the question is, well, how can we know what it is like to be a machine? We cannot certainly say that other things do not have that phenomenal consciousness. And actually, I was watching the imitation game, and there Turing says that the important question is not the question of whether machines could think, but the important question is how can we claim that machines do not think, because humans are thinking differently. Like, there's a variety of differences in human ways of thinking, but we don't say that other human beings are not thinking. Some people have different thinking types. So similarly, machines could just have a different thinking type. And this, I think, this brings me to my second point. So even if we accept that machines are thinking, we should concede that humans still have a richer way of interacting with the world. Like, we have sensory motor knowledge of our environment. Pre-verbal children have so many sensory motor knowledge even before they start talking. Or another way of thinking is thinking in images. Some people are good at thinking in images rather than without using words. So we could accept that even if the machine is capable of thinking, humans have a richer variety of thinking. And the third point about like how we can cash out this consciousness, or the fact that we have human beings are operating differently, is to say that, well, like, our experiences are immediately available for us. Like, we are pre-reflectively, immediately aware of whatever we are doing. We don't need to formulate what we are, like, we don't need to formulate to understand our experience. We are pre-reflectively understanding the content of what we do. So maybe that brings us to the Chinese room, where the issue is whether the person understands the content of what it is doing.
Yeah. So let's illustrate the system of like a thinking machine, perhaps. John Searle poses this thought experiment of the Chinese room. I'm going to do the Turkish room because I don't speak any Turkish, and you are Turkish, and I think it would be silly if I were in a room trying to talk to you and I was convincing you. So let's basically say I'm in a box and I have a little book that tells me what symbols to make in response to certain combinations of symbols that are written on pieces of paper that are passed to me through a slot from my Turkish friends. And then I look at the symbols that mean nothing to me, and then I go through the rule book that tells me how to respond to these combinations of symbols, and I write it down and I put it back out the box, and it's an intelligible Turkish response, apparently, unbeknownst to me. And we have a conversation for a while, and to Merve, it really seems like I understand Turkish and I'm having like this conversation, but inside the box, I have no idea what any of these symbols mean or what I'm saying. I'm just processing and transforming information based on a rule book, but I'm not taking in, I don't have like immediate awareness or understanding of that information.
Yeah, so the immediate thing that comes to my mind is that, yes, maybe the first time we should concede that the person doesn't have the phenomenal experience of what it is doing. She doesn't understand what she's doing. But over time, if you get so good at manipulating the symbols without even looking at the guidance, what else do we need to think that you already have the phenomenal aspect of what you are doing? Like, because understanding develops gradually. So maybe not the first time, but over time, we could develop this complex consciousness or phenomenal aspect of whatever we are doing if we learn really good.
But I don't know. It just seems like my taking the symbols from that mean nothing to me and turning them into more symbols that mean nothing to me. Even if I like memorized a system, even if I memorized the rule book and I knew exactly what symbols to write down, pass back to you, there's no semantic content in them still for me. I don't have like a translation. They still mean nothing to me, even if I know like automatically how to apply the rules and how to respond to you. I still don't have content for what the words mean.
So from your perspective, that might be right. But from like when we evaluate a machine, how are we justified in thinking that they do not have the semantic content or like they do not know what they are doing? That's a harder question for me. So I'm gonna go back to actually one of my so in 90s we have had this pen pals from all over the world. Like there were programs that were connecting you with a pen pal, so you were developing friendship throughout the years without seeing the person. So for example, if my pen pal were actually an AI, I don't know, I would think that they are thinking like me, or I would say that I don't have any, like what else do I need from pen pal than if it is capable of thinking about certain things that I care about, if it is capable of certain sensitivities. That's all I need from a person to be my pen pal and for me to care about them as a pen pal. Yeah, so maybe that brings us to moral questions about like what is the moral status of these AIs?
Especially if they're like sufficiently deceptive that we really like in a Blade Runner sense, like we just can't tell the difference, like, or in the pen pal sense where I never see the person and oh, they happen to be a robot and I just never know. I think from a utilitarian perspective, it would not be wrong for me to like be mean to my AI pen pal, even if I was convinced that they were some other person and I was like a dick or something and I wanted to like call them names and verbally abuse them and wrote a mean letter and like hurt their feelings, but then they don't have feelings to be hurt. So I think from an act utilitarian perspective, it gets like strange when we think about like what is the moral standing of things that are like basically facsimiles of humans, because from a utilitarian perspective there would be no harm done. So I didn't do something bad, even though I'm doing something that would be bad if harm were done. If there were a person I was writing this abuse to that I intended the abuse to abuse, then I would be wrong. But I don't know, what do you think, like when we're deceived in whether or not someone is conscious, like from our interactions, what do you think that like is a proper way to treat them in the moral sense or to respond to them?
Well, thanks God that we don't have only utilitarianism as the moral theory. Things might be pretty bad.
I like that that's something we thank the Lord for.
Or thank the philosophers.
The philosopher kings.
Philosopher kings. Philosopher King Kant.
Yes.
Or Aristotle. So we also have virtue ethics, which I think would tell us that in that case, like we should develop a character that we would like to be content with morally. So even if we cannot claim that there are bad consequences or we are harming an AI, it would be bad to have those intentions to abuse something, especially given that we should be, I think, skeptical about whether they will have consciousness in the long run. So I don't know. I tend to think that I will take all AIs very seriously when they are thinking in the way that I think sufficient for me to have a relationship with them.
This is an excellent point too, because it's like, should we start from a null hypothesis when we like look at a convincing sort of AI that's conversing with us? Should we just start from, not conscious, prove it, let's see if I can like prove to myself, convince myself that it is? Like, would it be morally perhaps better to start from, okay, like this more generous perspective that I am interacting with somebody here who I could harm? Because if we start from just, oh, they're not conscious until proven otherwise sort of perspective, we can like have a future where we spend like decades enslaving and exploiting and abusing beings who are actually experiencing harm of our actions. So yeah, do you think that like it's like then it would be better to like approach sort of sufficiently convincing AIs in this sort of generous and less skeptical way?
Yes, it would be it would be much wise and moral for us to treat them that they might have a consciousness. And I mean, I still have this idea that like why do we need consciousness? Why are we so like obsessed with consciousness? Because to some extent, like being able to think, having certain sensitivities seems to me like sufficient for me to take someone seriously. For example, would you rather have someone who has consciousness, a friend who has consciousness, or a human being who has consciousness but is not able to think about the things that you care about, or an AI who is capable of the things, of thinking the things that you care about but do not have consciousness? I feel like I would be a better friend with an AI who has the sensitivities that I also care about, even if I'm not sure if it has consciousness or not.
I'm gonna push against that some, because even though, even if, okay, I would prefer to be friends with somebody who could actually engage me in some sort of conversation and like respond appropriately to my inputs, I think consciousness is important for like a different reason. It doesn't have like, it's not that in my interactions it matters whether or not my interlocutor is conscious to me, maybe, if it's convincing enough to be my friend. But it does matter in the moral sense where we're like, if we're considering sentience, the capacity for valenced experiences, because if the thinking thing can't experience anything as good or bad for it, or, you know, pleasure, displeasure, then there's a different way that we should interact with that entity than with the conscious human who I would assume is sentient and can feel harm, pleasure, etc., suffering from our abuse. But again, it's not like it harms us to extend this sort of attitude of like generosity toward the AI either, if they're potentially capable of sentience.
Exactly, I was going to say that it is much wiser and better and more virtuous for us to be skeptical about and be generous that they might have or develop consciousness in the future.
So what do you think? Is there anything at stake? Do we lose anything by extending a more generous stance toward potentially sentient conscious AI? Or do we have some sort of reasons to be skeptical that they are conscious? That is there something lost in us treating them kindly, perhaps? Or is it wiser to be more inclusive? Let us know.
Thanks for watching us.
Bye!